Baldur's Gate 3 is extremely close to launch, and with it brings a plethora of abilities. Now, not all classes have access to all abilities at the beginning of the game, but there are 9 abilities every single class has access to and can utilize. Some are very simple and easy to use, while others will require some positioning to get the best effect from them. In this video, I'll be showing you how to use all 9 of these abilities on every single class should the opportunity arise. But before we jump into the video, I will be doing a giveaway of 2 copies of Baldur's Gate 3. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and leave a comment on your favorite class or spell, and that's pretty much it. You get a chance to win a free copy while staying up to date with all things Baldur's Gate 3. With that said, on to the first ability and arguably my favorite, let's talk about Shove. Shove is a combat action that allows your character to push, knock back, or knock down an enemy that you're close to. Now, Shove is a bonus action, so it will consume it whether you fail or not, so keep that in mind, but when you decide to shove an enemy, you'll make a strength-based check. What this means is if you're playing something like a barbarian, you're more likely to get this off versus a wizard, for instance. That's not to say not to use this as a wizard, as the threat and debuff can be pretty bad, and in theory you could push an enemy away, escape the attack of opportunity range because they're pushed away, and run away and reposition. Keep in mind, Shove take into account enemies' acrobatics and some other modifiers like if the opponent is too heavy, or if there's like a wall or some obstacle in the way, and your strength of course. But because of how cheap it is, how effective it can be, especially in the early game, if you can use it in a smart way, then give it a try. Some ways to use Shove is as followed. First off, the obvious, you can push enemies into dangerous situations and even possibly kill them with that push. We also talked about pushing enemies away for spacing, which is a great option for any class that doesn't exactly want enemies close to them or in their face. And you can push things like barrels or even potions to allies to create an effect on the ground. You got quite a few options from this, so I would highly recommend you kind of explore them. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned attack of opportunity. And for those of you who are not aware of what attack of opportunity is, I'll explain it briefly. When you're in melee range and you attempt a move action, you will notice red arrows pointing at you. This means that if you turn your back and run away, you give the enemies an opportunity to attack, hence the name. Now, just keep in mind, attack of opportunity will take your armor class into consideration, and if you do have good armor class, you could in theory dodge this effect, but it is automatic regardless of who turn it is on. This can also happen for you, so keep that in mind. If an enemy walks by you and their back is turned, you can get an attack of opportunity. The reason I bring this up is because Disengage will actually make it easier for you to avoid the attack of opportunity effect from triggering within the turn. If you're ever in a situation where you're surrounded or if your allies are dying and you want to kind of get away, you can disengage and get away. This is a great tool for it, and I would highly recommend it should you ever get in a pinch like this. Now, I find when you're disengaging, it's not uncommon for you to want to get pretty far away, and that's where dash comes in handy. Dash will consume 1 action to double your movement, and it's extremely easy for you to move around the battlefield with this active. One thing to note for rogues is you get this as a bonus action starting at level 2, so you can combo this with other move actions, and it's actually really good for rogues' mobility, so just a quick note there. Now, dash isn't only used for getting away, you can actually use this in combat. You can use it to get in combat faster, you can use it to reach objectives that have a set time limit. Dash is pretty much really amazing at just anything movement related, and compared to every other skill in the game, I'm pretty sure I use this significantly more. Now, jumping back to our example of you just fleeing, you can always just disengage, dash away very quickly, and then click the flee combat button once you're out of range and get out of combat. This is a helpful tip for people who are just trying to disengage completely from a fight and not sure how to do this. This one took me a very long time to figure out. Before we move on to the rest of the tips, I did want to ask you guys to subscribe to the channel. If this video has helped you out in any way thus far, subscribing helps me a ton. I've made hundreds of high quality videos with great information and put thousands of hours into work in these videos on the channel, and we're only sadly at 3,000 subscribers with the hundreds of hours of quality videos on the channel. Just remember guys, clicking the subscribe button not only helps me out, but it actually costs you absolutely nothing, and it'll keep you up to date with all things Baldur's Gate 3. With that said, let's continue. Now, if you're bad like me, then one of your best friends will be help. When an ally goes down in combat, they will require you to help them so that they can get back up. And for those of you who are not aware of how being down works, I'll explain. Once an ally reaches 0 hit points, they will go down. You can identify this effect by a red skull and some weird hand icon. When characters are down, they are incapacitated and cannot do anything to help themselves. What happens is they will be on a death saving check that the character must make in order to not die, and it requires a total of 3 successes to either stabilize or prevent death. Stabilizing doesn't necessarily mean you'll get up, it means that you just won't die. However, if you fail 3 times, you will die. Providing help will prevent this death and get them up if you do it in time. Another thing you can do with help is if an ally is under some sort of status effect like burning, sleeping, or immobilized, things like that, you can actually use help to help them sometimes. Help is probably going to be one of the things you use most of whenever, you're a little new to combat situations, but you guys need to be aware of it and it should make it much easier for you to progress. For those of you who prefer a different approach to combat, maybe something more stealth based, hide is a great option for this. Hide is an action that makes it hard for characters to detect you, and as long as you hide outside of the enemy sight cone, you can enter this state. You can see the enemy sight cone by holding shift, and if you do this within the sight cone, you will have checks like many others in the game that will require you to basically meet it in order for you to remain hidden. Factors such as brightness of the area are actually taken into consideration when you're hiding, which is a pretty cool thing, so try to hide in darker areas, but generally these are the ways to enter hiding. Hiding has a number of uses. One of them is pickpocketing, one of my favorites. When you want to maybe take an item like food, usually gold or some valuable key or something to open a chest without being seen, hiding allows you to do this stealthily. Just make sure you don't hide within their sight cones. While you're in soon to enter combat situations, I would recommend activating turn-based mode using shift plus space, which will pause enemies from moving, making it easier for you to position. A lot of times when attacking from this state makes your enemies surprise, which will skip their turn entirely. And it can really set you up for success, especially since you have an advantage from attacking from stealth. I find stealth to be one of the best at starting a fight, and if you can get in position and effectively start a fight this way, I would highly recommend you do it. Jump is another ability that can be used in and out of combat, and the jump distance is based upon your strength. So the stronger you are, the further you can jump, and depending on how high you are, can also increase this jump range. But jumping from too high can hurt you, and if you're high enough, you can prone yourself or even kill yourself from jumping that high, so you gotta be a little bit careful. You can also jump over hazards. You should see this pretty common in the tutorials that you lead into the game where you have to jump over like different terrains and stuff. And you can jump over fire, ice, and many other things so that you don't have to necessarily take damage while going through these or getting knocked down from like ice in combat. One thing I personally enjoy doing when jumping is jumping to high ground. If you ever played Divinity, then you know that attacking from high ground grants you a ton of advantage. And in Baldur's Gate 3, that's about the same. For instance, if you're like a ranged character, you can attack from high ground, so you can jump up, you can get more range, higher chance to land attacks, and getting a more advantageous look of the battlefield while doing so, and all it costed you was basically a jump action. Now, jump is a great way of positioning yourself, and just short of every fight that I'm aware of, I tend to use jump to like position myself preemptively for a fight. Dip is another ability that has some benefits, not really useful all the time. But I recently learned this thanks to your comments, but this requires a bonus action. And you can use this to add effects like fire, poison, and many other effects to add a +1 d4 of the element type to your weapon for 3 turns. There's many ways to get these effects, but I usually recommend just looking around the environment. You're always like some random explosion or something that's just on fire, or some poison on the ground or something. It's very easy to find these, but they're not always useful because mainly classes that attack with their melee weapon generally gets to, use it. But again, fairly easy to find these effects, and I would highly recommend you using dip if you have the extra points or you can't really take advantage of the bonus action in that turn. Next, let's talk about improvised weapon, and while I've seen very little use of it, I've watched quite a few people use this in order to get some cool usage out of it. First off, anything that can be picked up, you can use it as an attack. This includes objects in the area, like boxes or random barrels, or even living small creatures. You can like fling a demon at someone, which is kind of cool. I've also noticed that you can pick up really large things with this that probably isn't logical in normal combat, which kind of makes it funny for, any situation that you're in. Again, I haven't really found many usages out of this skill thus far, But should you need to improvise a weapon, maybe like get some type of weapon type, like I know hitting things with a barrel could do like bludgeoning or something, you can get like a lot of cool conditions out of these. All right, on to the final ability, and we're going to talk about throw. While improvised weapon picks up a weapon and smack opponents with it, throw does pretty much the same thing except for with range. You can throw pretty much anything you can pick up, and similar to shove, you can pick up potions and throw them at allies as well, or enemies. You can also pick up objects such as candles. If you have one just sitting in your back pocket for some reason, and there's some oil on the ground, you can pick it up and fling it. And very similar to improvised weapon, you can pick up living targets and throw them as well. The factors you need to take in consideration is very similar to real life. How much the object weighs, so if it's significantly heavier than you, you're probably not going to be able to throw it. How much strength you have, and the height advantage you have. So again, if you're throwing something while you're higher up, you'll get a slightly longer throw range from it. Now, if any of you know anything about me, I play a lot of games like Diablo, and I love the Amazon playstyle where you fling weapons. Baldur's Gate 3, while isn't as action-packed, actually has throwing weapons in it as well, and it is a great way of doing damage should you have a weapon that have this. I would highly recommend you check down in the weapon description for the tags that say throw, because the weapons that don't have this tag won't do as much damage, but the ones that do have this tag will actually throw and do a lot more damage. Now, last thing I do want to mention about throw is very similar to whenever you get up high and you attack from a distance. If you are very high and you throw an object from that same distance, you can actually get a lot of damage out of it. To what extent this can be like used, I'm not sure, but I've thrown many objects in the game and they tend to do decent damage the higher you are. So that's a really cool element to add to your arsenal. There you have it. That is 9 abilities all classes have access to. This should give you a bit of direction and some understanding on how to use these abilities and how they work. Should you have any questions, corrections, or even more tips, leave them down in the comments so it can help me and many other players out, because I imagine there's going to be a lot of players who would love these tips. And again, please consider subscribing for more Baldur's Gate 3 content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.